Thousands of soldiers marched into the desert, certain of victory. What they found stopped them cold. A civilization so organized, so powerful, so ferocious in battle that the greatest empires on earth were forced to either retreat or negotiate. This is not a legend. This happened, and most of the world has never heard of it. Welcome. What you are about to hear is one of the most remarkable stories in human history, and one of the least told. It is the story of the Kingdom of Kush, a civilization that rose in the heart of Africa, built cities that rivaled anything in the ancient world, produced warriors that terrified the mightiest armies, and actually conquered Egypt, becoming pharaohs themselves. If that surprises you, good, because this story should be far better known than it is. If you are new here, this channel is dedicated to bringing forgotten history back to life. The stories that didn't make it into your textbooks, but absolutely should have. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we cover this kind of history every single week. Now, let us go back roughly 3,000 years to a stretch of the Nile River that would become the birthplace of an empire. South of Egypt, along the banks of the Nile, lay a land the Egyptians called Kush, modern-day Sudan, a region of brutal heat, vast desert, and the most fertile strips along the river, a place where civilization did not just survive, it thrived. The Kingdom of Kush was not a small tribal settlement. At its height, it was one of the largest and most organized states in the ancient world, stretching from central Sudan all the way north into Egypt and beyond. Its capital cities changed over the centuries, from Kerma to Napata to the great city of Meroe, each one a center of trade, religion, military power, and culture. Kerma, the earliest capital, dates back to around 2500 BCE. That makes it one of the oldest urban centers in sub-Saharan Africa. Archaeologists have found enormous burial mounds, massive mud brick temples, and evidence of a society with sophisticated craft, trade, and social organization, all centuries before the famous pharaohs of Egypt's New Kingdom even existed.
But what truly set Kush apart from other ancient kingdoms was what it built in Meroe, its final and most powerful capital. Meroe became an industrial center unlike anything else in ancient Africa. The city was surrounded by enormous slag heaps, the waste product of iron smelting. Kush was producing iron on a massive, organized scale. Iron tools, iron weapons, the kind of technological capacity that gave armies a decisive edge. And the Kushites used every bit of it. Their society was not just built for war, though. Kush had a merchant class, a priestly class, farmers, craftsmen, and traders who connected the African interior to Egypt, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean world. Gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animals all flowed through Kushite hands. They were not an isolated civilization, they were a hub. And then there were the women. The Kushites had a tradition that set them apart from nearly every other ancient civilization. Women could rule, not as exceptions, not as regents holding power for absent men, as queens in their own right. They called them Kandakes, a word that would eventually enter the Roman world as Candace. These were warrior queens, some of whom led armies personally into battle. Their names appear in ancient records, on temple walls, and in the histories of the empires that encountered them. We will come back to one of them because her story is extraordinary. To understand why invaders were terrified of Kush, you have to understand their military. The Kushites were, above all else, archers. Their skill with the bow was so legendary, so precise, so devastating in battle, that the Egyptians, who fought them for centuries and eventually employed them as elite soldiers, gave Nubia a specific name. They called it Ta Seti, the land of the bow. That name appears in some of the earliest Egyptian texts ever found. From the very beginning of recorded history in the Nile Valley, the Kushites were known for one thing: their arrows hit their target. This was not casual skill. It was the product of a society that treated archery as a sacred discipline. Kushite boys trained from childhood. Their bows were powerful composite designs, layered with wood, horn, and sinew, capable of firing arrows with tremendous force and accuracy over long distances. In a pre-gunpowder world, a wall of Kushite archers was one of the most terrifying things an invading army could face. But it was not just the arrows. The Kushite military was organized and disciplined in ways that surprised enemies expecting simple tribal resistance. They had professional soldiers, hierarchy, strategy, and they trained in one of the most demanding environments on Earth, the desert and the harsh terrain of the Upper Nile. Soldiers who could survive and fight in that landscape were hardened in ways that men from more temperate lands simply were not.
They also used war elephants, a weapon of psychological terror as much as physical destruction. The sight of an elephant charging toward you in battle was enough to break formations and shatter morale. The Kushites, living in a land where elephants roamed, learned to use them in warfare, a capability that gave them yet another edge over conventional armies. By the time of their greatest military campaigns, Kush had built something remarkable, an army that was not just brave, but tactically sophisticated. And they were about to use it to do something that no one expected. Around 744 BCE, Egypt was in chaos. The country was fragmented, divided among competing rulers who fought each other for control. It was weak. And to the south, watching all of this with calculating eyes, was the Kushite king, Pai. Pai was not an opportunist. He saw himself as something more. He was a devout follower of the Egyptian god Amun, a god deeply worshipped at the Kushite holy city of Napata. In his mind, Egypt was the sacred land of Amun, and it was being desecrated by unworthy rulers. He was going to restore it. His army marched north. City after city fell, not always through destruction, but often through negotiation backed by overwhelming military force. Egyptian rulers who submitted were treated with respect. Those who resisted faced the full power of the Kushite army. By the time Pai reached Memphis, one of Egypt's great capitals, he had effectively taken control of the entire country. What makes this story extraordinary is what Pai did next. He did not loot Egypt. He did not burn it. He restored temples. He revived religious traditions. He governed as a pharaoh, because in his own mind and under Egyptian law, he was one. He had the title, the authority, and the divine legitimacy. Pai established the 25th dynasty of Egypt, known to historians as the Nubian dynasty or the Kushite pharaohs. Sometimes in modern scholarship, they are called the Black Pharaohs. This dynasty ruled Egypt for nearly a century, from around 744 to 656 BCE. The most famous ruler of this dynasty was Pharaoh Taharka, the son of Pai. Taharka ruled Egypt at the height of Kushite power, overseeing a period of monumental building, religious restoration, and political stability. He built temples, he expanded trade. Under his reign, Egypt and Kush were unified into a vast Nile Valley empire, one of the largest and most powerful states in the ancient world at that time. Taharka's name even appears in the Bible, in the second book of Kings, chapter 19, verse 9, where he is described as a king marching to fight against the Assyrian king Sennacherib. This was a real geopolitical conflict, documented in multiple ancient sources from Egypt, Kush, and Assyria alike.
And it was the Assyrians who would eventually end the Kushite rule of Egypt, though not without a brutal fight. The Assyrian Empire was, by the 7th century BCE, the most powerful military force in the world. Their army was organized, brutal, and equipped with iron weapons and siege technology that made them virtually unstoppable. They swept through the Middle East. They conquered kingdoms. They were feared everywhere they went. When they invaded Egypt, they pushed south, driving the Kushite pharaohs out of city after city. By around 663 BCE, they had taken Memphis and Thebes. The 25th dynasty's rule of Egypt was over. But here is what the history books often skip over. The Kushites did not collapse. They did not disappear. They retreated south, back to their homeland along the Upper Nile, and they rebuilt. The kingdom of Kush continued to exist and flourish for another 1,000 years after losing Egypt. Their capital at Meroe thrived. Their pyramids kept being built. Their trade networks kept operating. They were not finished. They were regrouping. And then came Rome. In 30 BCE, Rome conquered Egypt. The Emperor Augustus sent his forces south toward Kush, establishing a garrison at the city of Syene, modern Aswan. The Romans expected what all new powers expect, submission from their neighbors. They did not get it. In 25 BCE, a Kushite army, reportedly led by the warrior queen Amanirenas, Akandake, launched a bold strike north. They raided Roman-controlled Egypt. They sacked Syene. They captured prisoners. And in one of the most deliberately symbolic acts of defiance in ancient history, they seized bronze statues of Augustus Caesar. One of those statue heads, the bronze head of Augustus, was brought back to Meroe. It was buried under the entrance steps of a temple. Every soldier, every priest, every visitor who walked through that door stepped on the face of the Roman emperor forever. It was a message: we are not afraid of you. Rome responded. The Roman general Gaius Petronius led a counterattack south, burning the Kushite city of Napata. But even after that, the Kushites kept fighting. Amanirenas is recorded as fighting despite reportedly losing one of her eyes in the conflict and refusing to surrender. The result, documented in the ancient Greek geographer Strabo, was a peace treaty. Rome and Kush negotiated as equals. Rome agreed to withdraw forces and cancel tribute payments that had been demanded of Kush. The Kushites got what they wanted. That was not common. That was almost unheard of. Rome negotiated from a position of exhaustion. Kush had forced them to the table. When most people think of African pyramids, they think of Egypt, Giza, the Great Pyramid. But here is a fact that almost nobody knows. Sudan has more pyramids than Egypt.
At the site of Meroe alone, there are more than 200 pyramids, built over a period of roughly 600 years. They are smaller than the Egyptian ones, steeper, built in a slightly different style, but they are extraordinary, and they are still standing. In the middle of the Sudanese desert, visited by only a fraction of the tourists who flood into Egypt each year. These pyramids are royal tombs. Beneath them lie the kings and queens of Kush, including many of the Kandakes, the warrior queens who ruled and fought. Each pyramid is a statement of power, of faith, of the belief that death was not an ending but a transformation. The Kushites also left behind their own written language, Meroitic script, developed around the 3rd century BCE. It has a defined alphabet. It has been found on thousands of inscriptions across Sudan. Researchers can read the individual letters and sounds, but the language itself, what the words mean, has never been fully decoded. Which means that the Kushites' own account of their civilization, written in their own hand, remains locked away from us. We are still waiting to hear their version of this story. And then there is the damage that was done. In 1834,
An Italian explorer named Giuseppe Ferlini arrived at Meroe. Ferlini was not a scholar, he was a treasure hunter. He dynamited the tops off at least 40 of the Meroe pyramids, destroying them irreparably, searching for gold. He found some jewelry from a few tombs and sold it to European museums. The destruction he caused was catastrophic and permanent. 40 pyramids, ancient royal tombs, thousands of years old, reduced to rubble in the name of profit. The ones that remain are protected now, but the loss is irreversible. So why don't more people know this story? The honest answer is complicated, but it starts with the history of how history itself was written. In the 18th and 19th centuries, European scholars dominated the field of archaeology and ancient history. Many of them operated with assumptions, sometimes openly stated, sometimes implicit, that great civilization was a European or Near Eastern phenomenon. The idea that an African kingdom south of Egypt had conquered Egypt, built hundreds of pyramids, and forced Rome to the negotiating table did not fit neatly into that worldview. So it was minimized, left out of textbooks, buried under layers of neglect.
Archaeological work in Sudan has also been chronically underfunded compared to Egypt. Egypt draws millions of tourists and billions in heritage investment. Sudan, despite having sites of equal historical significance, receives a fraction of that attention. Sites that could be excavated, studied, and shared with the world sit partially exposed and under-researched. The undeciphered Meroitic script is also a significant barrier. Without being able to read Kush's own records in full, historians have had to rely largely on what their enemies and neighbors wrote about them: Egyptians, Greeks, Romans. And history written by your enemies is never the whole story. Modern scholarship has begun to correct this. In 2008, National Geographic published a major feature on the Black Pharaohs that introduced millions of readers to the 25th dynasty. Sudanese archaeologists and international teams continue to work at sites across the country. DNA studies, satellite imaging, and new excavation techniques are slowly revealing more. But there is still so much left to discover, and so much left to tell. Think about what this civilization did. They built cities in the desert when most of Europe was still scattered villages. They smelted iron on an industrial scale. They trained archers so precise that their name meant land of the bow for thousands of years. They marched north and took Egypt not as destroyers but as restorers, as pharaohs. They built more pyramids than the Egyptians, and when Rome, the most powerful empire the Western world had ever seen, came knocking, they fought back, buried the emperor's face under a temple floor, and negotiated a peace on their own terms. And yet, most people alive today have never heard their name. The kingdom of Kush stood for over 1,000 years. Its people were real, their wars were real, their queens were real. Their pyramids are still standing right now in the Sudanese desert, waiting for the world to pay attention. Maybe it is time we did. If this story moved you, if this is the kind of history you believe the world should know, then please share this video. Send it to someone who loves history. Post it somewhere it can find the audience it deserves. Subscribe to this channel if you are not already part of this community, because we have more stories like this one. Civilizations that changed the world and were somehow forgotten. Warriors, queens, builders, and thinkers who deserve to be remembered. Leave a comment below and tell us, what other lost civilizations do you want us to cover next? We read every single one. History is not just what we were taught, it is everything we have yet to learn. We'll see you in the next one.